Welcome back to the CCC News Podcast. I'm your host, Cole Goodwin. Joining me today is Keath Silva to talk about his new poetry book, King Crone and the Empty Nest, a collection of transformational poetry for rites of passage. Keath speaks openly in his new book about his experience of navigating his gender transition, grief, gender euphoria, parenting, transformation, connecting to nature, letting go of falsity, and embracing authenticity. The book is now available on bookbaby.com in both ebook and paperback form, or for pre-order on amazon.com. But first, a bit about Keath. Keath is a non-binary trans man who holds a special place in the local queer community in the Columbia River Gorge as a queer elder and a healing arts practitioner. And even though last year Keath moved to LA to continue his work here, he still holds a special place of honor in the hearts of many people here in the Gorge. In 2022, Keath self-published his first book of poetry, entitled Lady Death and Other Poems Venerating Change. I had the pleasure of getting to interview Keath about his poetry book back in 2022. And the 2 articles that came out from that interview were republished in over 800 other news outlets across the country and in the UK and Canada. Keath's work has a way of healing the reader and resonating with people around the world, especially trans folks who know firsthand about many of the issues Keath tackles in his poetry. I'm so honored to have Keath here with us today on this podcast and to get to share some of his newest work with our listeners. If you want to learn more about Keath, all his literary works, as well as information about his body work, herbal medicine, ancestral lineage healing, and sober psychedelic journey work, are available on his website at keathsilva.org. Thanks for joining us, Keath, and welcome to the CC News Podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
There's so much to talk about. It's hard to know where to start. So I guess let's start at the beginning. How did it feel to go through this creative process for this book this time around? You know, what inspired you to write this second book of poetry?
It was actually really supportive for myself to write it. I was just still going through my gender transition in a lot of ways and living through the last year that my youngest child would be in the home and getting ready to move from this beautiful, rural, pristine place to a big city. There's just a lot of change that was coming up and a lot of hard tasks I needed to handle and a lot of emotions and grief, really, and anticipation. And so I had an intuition one day that writing a book while I went through that year of transition would actually be a really big support for me. And it changed, it really helped. It changed what felt like an impossible task and something that felt sad and scary into like an epic journey that I could write about it while it was happening. You know, and the poetry saves me in a couple ways. One is, and I know I'm not alone because I work with a lot of people, I feel like what we have to offer creatively to the world needs to be given. You know, if I'm working with a client who's having a chronic health issue or just different things happening for them that they can't quite get their finger on, I always ask, like, what's happening in your creative life? You know, because if you're a painter and you're not painting, or you're a singer and you're not singing, you're a poet and you're not writing, something is stuck and stagnant, and that's going to start to show up in your life and in your body. And for me, it was the poetry that wasn't getting written that was causing depressive feelings. I had actual physical symptoms. And when I really checked my body, and I do body journaling, like, you know, if my knee has had something to say, what would it be? And I like listened to my body, and my body told me, you're not writing your poetry. And so I have to write it. And if a poem starts knocking on my door and I ignore it, like, that's very bad for my mental health. So in that way, it saves me of just like letting the channel of creativity flow through. And then the other way it saves me is like giving voice to what my internal experience is. And sometimes emotions can just be bottled up and like we don't know what they are. We just know we don't feel quite right. And poetry names it in a way that like our whole body, mind, spirit can receive. You know, comparing a feeling we have to a volcano, or, you know, giving it an image and a name and describing in like a visceral way how we feel starts to shift how we feel.
Totally. As a journalist and a poet, everything you said is really resonating with me. We use language to communicate And for me, writing poetry is this practice of artfully communicating some of the deepest truths, both for ourselves and for the reader. Your poetry in particular is so personal, and yet so many trans people can feel the truth of what you're saying in their own lives. And this sharing of your truth creates a spaciousness that also invites others to share their truth. And in that sharing of understanding, be healed. So many folks have experienced rejection for who they are, but right off the back in your book, you make space for everyone to be included. You write, every trans person has their own unique journey. Mine has not been one of feeling that I was born in the wrong body. I feel that I was born in the wrong world. And that struck me so hard right at the beginning of the book as being that invitation to the reader to have their experience included while also honoring your experience. Can you speak to that feeling of being born into the wrong world a bit and how it shows up in your life and writing?
Sure. And before I talk to that, though, I just wanted to say that I love your poetry so much. And I loved it when we did the poetry together. We did that live. It's just, so I'm just honored. And your work as a journalist is amazing too. So I'm excited to be here with you. Such a great service to this community that you offer. And I also wanted to say about, it's healing for me to write the poetry. And then I've gotten so much feedback that the poetry resonates for people. And it's so true. If you can hear someone else describing an experience that you're also having, there's a relief, like I'm not alone. So I just wanted to mention that. And then, the thing about finally discovering like, oh, wait a minute, there is actually nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong going on in the social structure around me. And that when I really was able to believe that down to my core, it's so healing, because it's very easy, as humans to believe that if people are displeased with us and they don't want us around and we get a negative message everywhere we go, that there's something wrong with us, but the truth is there's nothing wrong with me. The people around me were still indoctrinated by this idea that there's a binary, and it was no reflection on myself. It was a reflection on just how unhealed, how uneducated the people and the society around me was. And when I really got that, it's so liberating. Like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. There's problems here, but it's not me.
Yeah, I know for me, at least, that discovery of being able to be free in the truth of who I am as a non-binary person has been so vital to letting in joy and just being able to get through the nitty-gritty of the daily human experience in the face of what so many people experience today, which is the way transgender experience has been so politicized and fetishized and scapegoated. And that's something I really feel in your poetry too, which is this deep love of the world and also this deep hurt around people who don't want to share that world and are even actively trying to erase trans people from the face of it. And one of the ways this erasure can happen is through refusal to use trans people's correct pronouns. And you talk about this in your book, about the impact both of being misgendered and being gendered correctly. And I'm hoping you can share a little bit about how you deal with that in your everyday life today.
Yeah, and it's really changed for me. There's a poet and a speaker and an incredible healer leader called Alok Vaid-Menon. And some of their words about how the transphobia really comes from that person's fear and maybe their oppression has really shifted how I'm responding to transphobia in the world. Of course, I'm going to stand up against violence and do what I can to educate and make it a better place for other trans people. But it's different now. At first, when I was misgendered, it was traumatic. Like it would wreck my day. And it actually doesn't bother me anymore. I feel so secure in like who I am. I still speak about misgendering a lot because there's a lot of people that it's going to really mess them up. So it's like, stop doing it. But for myself, I think 2 reasons don't really bother me anymore. One is this, what I was talking about is there's just a compassion. It's like, they don't know, most of the time they're not doing it on purpose. I do sometimes experience like an aggressive misgendering, but even that I think is coming from their fear. And I think most people haven't had a chance to explore how they actually want to express themselves in the world. And even if they're cis and they're like happy with their gender, they've been told like, well, if you're, since you're a boy, you can't walk like that. You can't talk like that. You can't gesture. You can't be, so I just feel like instead of thinking that it's an attack on me, it's just them expressing their pain and their confusion. And I think it could be really threatening to see someone who's living their raw truth when you've got so much unexplored and suppressed wounding and trauma around your gender. So that's one reason that it doesn't really bother me anymore.
Can I just riff on that for a second? It's so interesting to me that you're talking about this change you experienced, because I've had a very similar experience as a trans person where, in the beginning, it was so fresh. It was so new. I was new. I was like I was just born, just out of the closet as a baby trans person. And I was so emotionally fragile. And there was all these people who were not supportive around me, who were just piling this trauma on top of me every single day. And they just piled on all these myths and misconceptions and perpetuated lies like the trans movement is hurting children and so on. And then misgendered me on top of it all. And it hurt because I had all these people telling me who I was and none of it fit. It was all lies. I knew who I was and it wasn't that. And it made me feel so unseen as an individual. But over time, the longer I've gotten to be in my truth, in my trans identity, the more centered I've become in knowing who I am and who I'm not, and the less misgendering has really affected me because I know who I am. And now when someone misgenders me, I'm just kind of like, oh, you don't know me. And sometimes I have to decide right then in that moment, whether I'm going to open that door to letting myself be known, or if this is somebody who doesn't get to know me like that, maybe I even have to lock that door sometimes in order to protect myself.
Exactly. It's a whole process. And that's exactly the other reason for me is because I feel okay on the inside. And so I don't need everyone to see me. And a huge part of why I feel okay on the inside is I am surrounded by trans community. And so I always feel like I'm going to cry when I say that. Like, we need to be around people that really see us. And I'm like getting a daily dose. My whole life is surrounded by trans people who see me, really get it and are sharing a lived experience. And so it's filling me up. Like my heart, my body, my soul is constantly being affirmed. Like, yes, we see who you are. We love you. We celebrate you. And so if someone on the street calls me ma'am, I'm like, whatever. It's like a fly, like whatever, you're missing out. And then it can actually be funny. Like there's definitely experiences of like, guess what happened today? Talking to other trans folks and we're like, oh, and there's definitely a place where it's not funny and it really needs to stop because it leads to violence and suicide. I'm so fortunate to have so much support and healing modalities and things I've had access to where I could heal and feel okay on the inside. And there's a whole lot of us out there that don't have that access and are alone. And something like being misgendered could be the difference between life and death. So I don't want to downplay how important it is for every cis person to take a class. We can leave resources of where, you can just study yourself online, find out just how to shift yourself to be a support for us, because you unknowingly are walking around wrecking people's days and possibly killing them. Sorry, but it's true. And it's not that hard to just shift your language, listen to what our experience is about and be an ally. So please do that work.
Totally. All right, Keath, I want to invite you to read us a poem from your new book. Can you pick out maybe a favorite poem to share with us?
Of course. Of course. I love that. I like this one because it speaks, I think, to everyone, not just people living the trans experience. It's Letter to My Conditioned Self. Please stop rattling me with everything that must be done. It is a lie that I'll feel better when it's complete. Life is never neat, wrapped up and over. One thing spills into another in a continuous and messy cycle dance. So caress my spine in place of shaking my core and demanding results. Hold me with your love in my disarray instead of whipping me into shape.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So kind of shifting gears here, we're talking about transformation, transforming language, transforming ourselves. And part of that conversation around transformation comes from just having gotten to live, to have lots of life experience. Your book is titled King Crone and the Empty Nest. And that title paints this pretty accurate picture of what you've written here. Your poems speak to the wisdom you've gained both before, during, and after your transition, as well as insights about aging and parenting, both your children and your own inner child. In one of your poems, you talk about birthing yourself and raising that young man inside of you from this wild teenager into this non-binary space of a King Crone archetype that is both a feminine and masculine experience of life. What does being a King Crone mean to you? What do those words mean to you?
They mean so much to me. I love the Crone archetype. And as I was presenting as a cis woman, I did a lot of work healing wombs and leading women's circles, goddess circles, for years and years and years. And anytime I say women, I mean all women. I mean trans women, cis women, all women. In those circles, there's a lot of talk about the stages of life and how significant that is. There's the child, there's the maiden, there's the mother or parent, there's the crone, the elder. And I've led plenty of rituals for women who are transitioning into the crone stage and honoring that. In our society, it's often looked down upon to be older, like, oh, life's over, now it's downhill. It's like, no. In any culture that's intact with their wisdom, the elders are who you go to, for wisdom, and it's revered and it's honored. And so we will honor a woman, and when she transitions into her cronehood, she gets a crown. And croning is also a time to shift attention from caretaking. It's beautiful to raise children, to raise garden projects, whatever it is, this caretaking is beautiful. And oftentimes when you switch into cronehood, you're looking within more. It's almost like the parenting or the mothering stage is like summer, and then crone is like autumn, winter. It's like a time of looking within. And what is that calling deep inside? Maybe some of my responsibilities of raising children or doing a lot of giving out in the world in different ways is coming to an end. And now it's time for me to what did I really come here to do? What is that deep calling? What is my spirit asking for? And maybe I don't have as many family responsibilities, so I can tend to that call inside and nourish my creativity and come to a service that might have a wider reach, to humankind rather than maybe a small number of people. So it's like an expansion. And crone is also related to learning how to say no. There's a fierceness. And I don't care what people think of me anymore. And then some of the archetypes of the crone, it's going to be a bearded lady and, we're allowed to be wilder and, just tap into that deep wild wisdom. So I just love the crone archetype. And I still identify with that. I love my feminine side and the like woman's power. I'm so into all of that. But that's not all of me. If I was just the crone, I'd be like, wait a minute, this isn't working for me. And so for me, the king is an elder man who is really stepping into his wisdom and who is fierce for justice, for protection, like has a healthy, divine, masculine energy that supports and provides and nourishes. And he's also honoring his calling, which you might say, I mean, all of it, I really don't give into the binary at all, but for lack of a better word, like he may be tapping into his femininity or like just his more intuitive side. So like a king is balanced actually, and also is into like the softer aspects of himself. And so that he can have compassion and gentleness. Yeah. So you got both together and it's pretty juicy.
I love that. I love that you use the word juicy in your poetry as well. It's such a good word. I also see that the king is like this leader. And same with the crone. Although I think with the crone, we see more of this archetype of being kind of like a hermit or being very solitary. But maybe that has more to do with our expectations today as opposed to, traditional ways of living in which our elders are leading us and guiding us.
It's so true. Even though there's often some element of spending more time with ourselves in the older years, like contemplation and really getting to know ourselves and valuing that solitude. It's often a call to a bigger community service. Like my beloved teacher, Miss Beatrice Torres Waite, I was trying to be a midwife, in my 20s. And she's like, what are you doing? She's like, we wait until like all the children have left the house, and I honor that not everyone has children, whatever it is. Like we honor until we are older, and then we're free. We're free to serve the community. So it's not a time to give up or retire. It's like to really give a wider, bigger service. Yeah, and be a community leader and so much about service and holding space for those who are now walking in the steps that we walked in.
So wise. I'm curious for you, do you feel like you've crossed over the threshold into being King Crone? I mean, I know for me as a young queer person in the Gorge, I have thought of you in that archetype for a while now, but I'm curious for you. Do you feel like you've crossed that threshold?
I'm what you call as a baby King Crone. I have people in my life, in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are really established in their King Croneness or their Croneness or their Kingness or their, what is a non-binary King Crone? And so I'm a baby King Crone, just stepping into it, still grieving, not being a full-time parent, and just finding my way in the kingness and the croneness.
Finding your way in the kingness and the croneness. I love that. That's awesome. And you write something about this, about having the hormonal ride of at least 2 lifetimes and how it hasn't been easy, but has given you a lot of insights into a gendered experience of life. How does queerness and transness act as a bridge of understanding? And how have you experienced that in your healing practice?
First, with the lived experience, it is delicious for me now in my private practice, because whether the person's going through menopause or, is trying to get pregnant or transitioning to male, transitioning, whatever's going on for them, for most people, I have really some sense of what that's like. And so it's so delightful to be able to speak to such a wide range of people with different experiences and be like, I have lived through that. And this is what I did. So it's just been really fun, actually. Yeah. And then the other part was?
We're talking about being a bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Connecting peace to heal society.
Yeah. For that reason, as well, that I've lived all those different things, I can really relate to cis men now because I know what testosterone feels like in my body. And I couldn't really relate to them before. I was afraid of them. And so having the experience of understanding what a force testosterone is and what an impact it has on your mind and your body, like now I have a bridge to cis men and have been able to earn their trust because I can speak to the experience that they're having. Then they open up to me. And I used to be someone that just felt perpetrated against by cis men, especially cis straight men. And I don't feel that way anymore. I've heard their stories, and so many cis men were traumatized as children, and the gentleness was beaten out of them, and they were taught that they had privilege. They were taught to mistreat women and objectify people. So being a trans person who has taken testosterone, I have a compassion and understanding of what's going on for them and how hard it is to heal and unpack and undo toxic masculinity. And I have walked beside, clients, friends, people in my community who have done that work to heal the wounds and then to dismantle that belief system that they're better than everyone else and they can get everything they want and all that stuff. And it's a hard thing. And it's very hard to tame testosterone. So I have compassion. I still don't condone any abuse that they're doing, but it's really hard to heal from that. So in that way, I feel like I'm in a bridge. And then also I've experienced a lot of abuse by men when I was walking around as a girl and a woman. And so when I'm deep friends with cis men, then I can also share how it is to be a woman. And then I can also understand and connect with women about being a woman. Like it just causes this bridge. And I've also had the feedback from clients that are like, you're the first safe male presence I've ever been in. And so there's just a lot of bridge building. And it also opens people's minds. A lot of clients that never met a trans person before stayed with me through the transition. And so it's like now they trust a trans person. And so that bridge can be built that way as well.
You write in your book about some horrifying bullying experiences you had and the lack of support you had for your queerness. There was this phase in your life where your self-love was just being chipped away at by society. And a lot of people, including myself who are queer, chose to fit in during some of those difficult times during school in order to prevent themselves from becoming a target. Can you share any advice that you have for trans kids trying to navigate the world today?
Well, first of all is to really, really cultivate whatever wisp of self-love that you have and connection with yourself and find ways to fortify that, whether that's like a meditation practice, your journal, connecting with a tree, whatever helps you like remember who you are and like build that up every day, to remember who you are, to know who you are. Regardless of what's going on around you, it's going to be that sanctuary inside yourself. And it's a hard journey. I can't just say, oh yeah, believe in yourself, love yourself. Like it's a journey and you got to fight for it to believe that the people that aren't seeing you for who you are or are bullying you or threatening you, they are diseased, they are uneducated, they are wounded, and their reaction to you has nothing to do with you. You are beautiful and magical, and you have gifts that nobody else has. It's only yours to give. We need you here, and you need to really get to know yourself and those gifts and honor your creativity, even if you have to do it in hiding while you're not safe, but to cultivate knowing yourself and knowing your own breath and your body and just being your own hero. And then find other trans and queer people. Even if you're so isolated somewhere, there's no one in your town, find them on the internet. It's like just connecting in a safe way. Make sure, be careful. To be around people and connect with people that have your lived experience, and surround yourself with people that do believe in you. Find that LGBTQ club, whatever it is, to connect. And there may be a time that you have to be a shapeshifter, for whatever reason. We're in a world right now where we're not safe a lot of the time. And I hope and I pray that this is going to change. And, there's times that I shapeshift and I pretend, and I don't want to live my life like that, but I would rather be alive than, have to go through that sometimes. And I make it like an epic story for myself, that I am doing this because of my resilience, and I can put on a cloak and shift if I need to save my life. And sometimes you'll need to be patient. You might need to wait on some things till you're 18. But if you have that belief of who you are inside, you keep showing up for yourself and you find your people, it's going to be okay. And I also want to say to be aware of fitting into boxes, even trans boxes, because each person is so different, and trans people have been here ever since humans have been here. And they were trans without hormones. They were trans without surgery. They're trans without binders. They're trans without packers. I feel like it's really important to take the time to explore what is right for you. Not like, well, I'm trans, so I need to prove I'm trans by having a surgery. To me, surgery is a really huge decision. And I'm so glad that we have it. It saves a lot of lives. And it's not for everyone. And it's a big decision that you can't usually turn around. And so, yes, sometimes it's necessary very quickly to save someone's life. And it's not for everyone. So to really, through journaling, if you can find a trans affirming counselor, support groups, every way that you can, to really find out who you are and what your gender expression is, and how you want to do that for yourself. Because there are voices out there that like, well, you're not really trans if you don't blah, blah, blah. That's such a lie. Like, you get to do this the way that is exactly right for you. And sometimes it takes a while to know what that is. So follow your heart, be true to yourself, and find your people. It's going to be okay. And stay safe however you need to until you can find those spaces where you can be free in your community. And stay here, please. We need you. There are millions of trans adults who are fighting for you. We love you so much. We see who you are. And there's a way to tap into, even if, you may have parents, caregivers, teachers that aren't supporting you. You're not going to be a child forever, and you can find the support that you need. And there's a way to tap into a field of trans love and support that's available to you, and trans ancestors. Look into the history of these amazing trans women, trans men, non-binary people that fought for our freedom, and learn who they are. And, depending on what your belief is, my belief is that they're still around in spirit. And some of them talk to me, to lead. And you have ancestors in your own bloodline that were trans and that were non-binary and that were queer, that can support you. So you are not alone. Even if your immediate surroundings aren't supportive, there's a well of support that you can tap into. Along with leaning into just like the vast truth of who you are and believing in that is reaching for support beyond humans as well. We all need human support, but there's, and depending on your belief systems, maybe you believe in angels or, whatever spiritual or not spiritual, beyond human supports that you can find. It can really get you through, and there's unending support for you in that. So for me, it's leading into nature, because nature is so queer. There's non-binary trees out. There's all kinds of examples in nature that the beings of nature, they are exactly who they are. They are not going to take criticism from anyone. They are so unique, and the expression there is just so free. And so when I'm having a lot of trouble with humans and not finding the support. Humans are fallible, they're even the best of us are not going to show up for you well all the time. And so I make relationship with rocks, trees, water, fire, mountains, stars, and lean into that. There's a connection that we have with nature that is so healing. Even if you live dense in the city, there's a dandelion peeking out of a sidewalk crack. There's a little bit of a star you can see through the bright lights. There's something. There may be a tree somewhere. Those beings have been here for so long. They have so much wisdom. I like to lean up against a tree and just tell them my problems. I really feel supported by that. So just a little plug for when the humans aren't doing it for you, there's a rock or a tree just waiting to be your friend. Or a plant, flowers.
And you wrote a poem called A Message to Trans Youth. I think for all of us, for those of us who have now grown up and may have an inner child that still needs healing, and also for the youth of today, would you read that for us?
Of course. I love that. And it's been so fun how many young people have now used it, like in meetings for their school to change the bathrooms. It's really gotten around. So I'm excited about that. Okay. A message for trans youth. There are many who come before you. We are shining bright, holding you in our warmth. We are working to make the world a place where you can smile, live, and play, and be celebrated. Until then, tend the flame in your wild, creative hearts. Find us and those who walk beside you. We will overcome. The world needs your light.
Thank you so much for sharing that message for trans youth. I love the imagery of tending to our inner flame and feeding that source of inspiration and energy and creativity and using our self-expression to light up the dark. So thank you for that. Well, thank you so much, Keath, for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate getting to spend this time with you, to chat about your new book and share the trans experience with our listeners. To learn more about Keath and his healing practice and his offerings, please visit keathsilva.org. Until next time, this is Cole Goodwin of CCC News, signing off.